Next slide, whoops, go back. Government procurement and CETA. No, no, keep going back. Yes, thanks, Eliane. Whoops. Okay, I finished introduction. I'm now on slide number 3. This September 2020 will mark the 3rd anniversary of the coming into force of CETA. Section 19 and the annexes are very important as they expand and guarantee opportunities for European companies to supply goods and services and construction to all levels of government and to a wide variety of entities operating in the public services sector. As well, it also describes CETA's coverage of government contracts, listing the entities that are subject to the procedures and the obligations of the government procurement, and are organized to separately identify entities at the government level, aiming to address each country's particularities and needs. Now, slide 4, we're looking at CETA thresholds. CETA applies only to high value procurement contacts in both Canada and Europe. The reason for this is so that small and medium-sized domestic companies can contribute to contact with the government to stimulate local development. There are exceptions in CETA, and they are found in the annexes by member state. This is similar to Canada's other comprehensive trade agreements. CETA's exceptions relate to Aboriginal interests, defense and national security, R&D, financial services, health, recreation, education, and regional development. On slide 5, we have a slide on the thresholds where the Global Affairs Canada calculated the minimum value thresholds in Canadian dollars for the years 2020 and 2021. You'll see from that chart that there are certain values, for example, in the central government, and what that means is the federal government. It's broken down between goods, services, and construction. And also you have a sub-central government thresholds. And by sub-central governments, we mean the provincial, territorial, as well as other public sectors. So you see the thresholds there. And if we flip to the next slide, 6, this is one of the tips that we want to focus on. If the EU company decides to operate its business in Canada through a Canadian incorporated entity, the thresholds do not apply. So that broadens the opportunities for European companies. The incorporation gives the Canadian business of the EU company the status of a Canadian corporation, which means it can contract with the government of Canada without regard to the CETA limitations. Now, with regard to incorporating in Canada, there are a number of choices and issues that flow from that. In Canada, you can incorporate either federally, that's under the Canada Business Corporations Act or the CBCA, but you can also incorporate in the individual provinces, for example, in Ontario under the Ontario Business Corporations Act or OBCA. Now, there are certain issues depending on what jurisdiction you choose. And most foreign companies will focus initially on the federal incorporation because it gives them protection of their name all across Canada. However, many jurisdictions, including incorporating federally or in Ontario, have certain requirements where 25% of the directors of that company must be Canadian resident directors. And a lot of times the foreign entity doesn't know anybody. And we're talking about directors and not shareholders. The shareholders can all be Europeans. It's just that 1/4 of the directors need to be Canadian residents. What we do is that there are other jurisdictions in Canada, which includes British Columbia, that do not have the resident director requirements. So we have certain strategies where we can incorporate, for example, in British Columbia, extra provincially licensed in Ontario, and they were able to then meet the requirements under the Ontario Business Corporations Act. However, when we incorporate Ontario, the name is protected in Ontario, but not necessarily in any of the other provinces. So that if a company decides then to do business in another part of Canada, may find that the name is not available. And what we do recommend is to file a trademark, which is good all across Canada to protect the brand all across Canada. My last slide, 7, is basically just a statement that this presentation focuses on procurement opportunities for EU companies that do not carry on their business in Canada through a corporation. And now I call upon Eliane De Silva with respect to the procurement process.
Thanks, Eugene. Hi, everyone. I'm going to get started speaking about the procurement process at the federal level first. All information regarding All information regarding current and past federal government opportunities are available at the Buy and Sell website. In the website, companies can identify if a specific tender is covered under CETA and whether EU companies are allowed to submit proposals. The Buy and Sell website offers a variety of information and guidelines. At the website, you can search and monitor for opportunities. And you can also subscribe to be notified by email when a new opportunity is available or when updates are made. The federal government maintains a goods and service identification number that is very helpful for companies because EU companies, they can identify their corresponding goods and service code. And with this in hand, they can go and search for past and current opportunities and also for pre-qualified suppliers that are using the same code. It's also possible to find and identify competitors and possible partners. Every BD opportunity provides options to join a list of interested suppliers. So by joining that list, companies' information and interest is publicly available. And also companies can see other people that are interested and have expressed that interest in a joint venture. And for that same specifically opportunity. Another good resource it's available in the website is the web usage information. You can see the indicator of market interest in that opportunity. So how the process works. So first, the procurement process starts when the federal department or agents sends a requisition to PSPC, which is the Public Service and Procurement Canada. PSPC is the body responsible for the administration of most of the federal purchasers of goods and service. And once the requisition is made, EU company has to register as a supplier. EU companies that are not incorporated in Canada, they must obtain a business number with CRA, which is our Canadian Revenue Agents. After having the business number, companies then can go ahead and register it in the supplier registration system and then obtain a procurement business number that is going to be used to apply to bid on opportunities. Then the business will be ready to start promoting itself. It's very important that the federal government contracting authority knows you and knows your business. So in your proposal, you have to highlight all the key features and all the information that differentiates you from other competitors. Also, the Canadian government is always looking for products and services that are environmental friendly. So if your product and service has these features, you definitely should include that in your proposal. Bidding on opportunities. So every bidding is unique and every method of contracting has its own requirements. So companies can be asked to provide in a separate sections information regarding technical, management, and financial. The technical is the very important one. I would say that is the most important. Price, it's not usually the main criteria. The main criteria is best overall value and the highest technical bid. Companies might also be required to go through a security clearance, and there is also a possibility of requesting a debriefing from the contracting authority. This is very helpful for EU companies so they can identify their strengths and weakness, and they can also, with that information, improve for the next bidding. Yeah. Another interesting resource is that the federal government has delegated its authority over bidding disputes to CITT, which is the Canadian International Trading Tribunal. CITT has jurisdiction over matters related to procurement under CETA, and companies can file complaints there. But in any case, we recommended that companies first contact the contracting authority to address any concerns that they might have at any stage of the bidding, before, during, and after the solicitation phase. So this is an example of how you can find the information at the buy and sell website. So here you have a short description of the business, of the opportunity. In this case, it's a software as a service. Right here, you can see the status. Right here, you can see the business, the goods and service number. If you click here, you're going to be directly to a page where you can find information of all other related opportunities under the same goods and service. Here, as I mentioned before, you can add yourself to a list of interested suppliers, and other people would see you and see that you are interested in maybe partnering. Or if you don't want to, you can also see who are the ones already registered here, who are the competitors or possible partners. Another interesting feature is that you can see how many views the page had, and those numbers are only in English. If you want to have the total amount, you have to subscribe to have the French language as well. You can get notifications for the standard. By clicking here, you would receive notifications for this specific opportunity. And the most important information that you should be aware is if this opportunity is covered by CETA. So here you can see all the agreements that this specific opportunity is allowing to submit proposals, and CETA is added here. And so it would be available for EU companies. So the central government, each province and territory of Canada, they maintain its own needs independently. So in order for search for opportunities, companies have to look at each province and territory website. In the procurement article that you can publish recently, we provided all the links for the respective websites. There are also private providers that offer this information in an easier way, but you can go to any specifically province and territory and search for the opportunities. So Ontario condenses all its opportunities under the Ontario Tenders portal. But you have to be aware that sometimes other agents also maintain their own e-tendering website. For example, the Ministry of Transportation uses its own. And again, another good resource would be hiring private providers to identify where the opportunities are coming from at the provincial level. Ontario adopted this United Nations Standard Products and Service Code that allows companies to search in an easier way. And so by creating a profile and by linking their respective codes, companies can receive notifications regarding new opportunities or amendments to current opportunity. So In order to become a vendor for the government of Ontario, companies also must have a CRA number, and they might also be required to go through a tax and a security screening clearance. Similar to the federal level, companies can request a debriefing from the contracting authority, and it can be very helpful in identifying strengths and weaknesses and improve for the next bidding. Complaints can be filed with the contracting authority, but different than the federal government, Ontario has not a administrative tribunal. Now specifically about Quebec, all past and current opportunities are available at the CETA portal. And at the portal, companies can subscribe as a supplier, and by paying a subscription fee, they can download tender documents and they can bid on opportunities. If a company is not registered to carry on business in Quebec, they have to select an option that indicates that the business is not, it is outside of Quebec. In that way, they would not be required to provide information that it's only required for Quebec companies. In Quebec, CETA is identified actually as AECG and not as CETA. And this information is very useful when you are trying to identify if a specific bidding opportunity is covered by CETA. Similar to Ontario, Quebec has adopted its goods and service classification system, which facilitates the search for related opportunities and for partners and for competitors. And a unique feature about Quebec, every tender above $5 million for construction contracts or above $1 million for service contracts, companies have to request an authorization with AMP. AMP is the body that oversees and registered business enterprise that are authorized to enter into public contracts. This process can take time. So it is recommended that once you register and once you have interest in selling for the government of Quebec, you should start the process right away. It is very easy to achieve those values because any possible renew period of a contract would be added to the overall value. Another requirement for foreign enterprise is that if they not pay tax yet in the province of Quebec, they have to provide a tax attestation letter from the revenue agents of their respective countries. Please be aware that all the AMP decisions are issued only in French. Now I will give a word to Barbara Doherty.
Thanks, Eliane. I believe I'm unmuted. Thank you. I'm pleased to have the opportunity today to talk about some keys to success, some success stories that we've seen with EU companies accessing CETA and other access points for providing services to the various levels of government in Canada, and to identify what we think are some of the key sectors for success now and into the future. So like with any project, there are a number of steps that you would routinely go through in advance of making a bid, which culminate with you're getting your bid in on time, with the right number of copies and the right signatures, all within the time frame set out in the procurement. But I've identified 4 top tips that I've seen people trip over, and I suggest are keys to success. The first one is to stay informed. The government budget priorities and public statements will often set out good keys to what the government is looking for and their future areas of key identification for investment. And this applies to all levels of government. So you'll have something coming out of the federal government, the provincial governments, and municipalities. Touching on these goals will help you succeed in your process. And Eliane mentioned the clean tech feature that everybody's very interested in these days. So if you can work that into your proposal, almost any proposal, it adds to your chance of success. So we included a letter as an example in our article that was sent by the Prime Minister to Minister Anand on her appointment, which is rich in terms of priorities, from participating in apprenticeship programs to supporting diversity and commitment to zero emission vehicles. So those types of areas, I think, are what you can see being a focus of the federal government coming up in the future. Although COVID probably has even adjusted those priorities, and I'll make some comments on that in a minute. So the second is to be prepared. And again, Eliane touched on this. If you can get any of your registrations done in advance, do that. If you can work on a description of your business that highlights your capabilities and your differentiating features, you should probably have that in the can so that you can very quickly modify it and tailor it to any specific opportunity. Be complete in your response, and I have seen this be fatal in situations where somebody hasn't gone through the proposal and ticked off all the boxes in terms of identifying and responding to each and every part of the proposal. Lastly, bid to your strengths. If you don't have the capability in one part of the proposal, partner with someone who does. Don't try and fudge it because it will become apparent through the process that you don't have that capability, and that's going to hurt you. Eliane, next slide. So a large number of EU companies have won public contracts in Canada. There's sort of three ways to do it. One is by submitting the bid from their headquarters in their home country, which is what CETA facilitates in a way that wasn't available in the past. They may participate as part of a joint venture or consortium with a Canadian partner or a group of partners, some of which are non-Canadians, or through, as Eugene suggested, a Canadian subsidiary. And I can't really emphasize this enough. Just because you're not required to have a Canadian entity in order to take advantage of some of the opportunities that are identified in CETA doesn't mean that you won't choose that route. All CETA does is really provide you with that new opportunity route, if you will. There may be other reasons why you might want to establish a presence in Canada, whether it's tax or to take advantage of R&D opportunities that are fully supported by our governments. We're very rich in R&D credits and grants that are given for undertaking those kinds of opportunities in Canada. So that may be part of supporting your bid process. The next slide, Eliane. In terms of success stories, now we did, we actually, Eliane did this, did a search of the buy and sell site to identify EU suppliers in current procurement opportunities, so very current, I think right up into the 2020s, and identified Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain. Now, that's not to say those are the only countries from the EU that have been successful. There are some limitations in terms of the search. Perhaps a company has chosen not to supply directly, so they may fall outside of the CETA search parameters that are coughed up when you do this type of search. So there'll be other countries that have been successful in procuring federal government procurements. The next slide, Eliane. So of those successes, the goods and services supplied by EU companies through CETA were identified in these various areas. So anything from human resource services to armored sports utility vehicles to snow-friendly equipment, as we spend a lot of time under a white blanket in this country, waste disposal equipment, spectrophotometers, which I wasn't sure what that was, so I looked it up, and it is the equipment that's used to measure the uniformity of color in applied to products in the manufacturing process. So if you make those, there's some success stories in that area. Next, please. In terms of identifying the key sectors for success, I've outlined energy, infrastructure, clean tech, and information and communication technology as 4 of the key sectors going forward. Well, they're already here, but will have more and more impact in the future. Of course, the energy sector has opportunities available for EU companies. Procurement opportunities in the energy sector include Alberta, the Alberta Purchasing Connection. We haven't mentioned Alberta as yet. It gives procurement purchasers a user-friendly tool for opportunities and solicitation documents. It's used to advertise and distribute solicitation documents by the government of Alberta, municipalities, academic institutions, school boards, and health authorities. That's called the MASH sector. It used to be called the MUSH Center because the academic institution and school boards were covered under universities. So they decided they didn't like the MUSH sector. They've changed it to MASH, as well as construction and energy sectors, including wind and solar energy. One Italian company that we identified, which is a world leader in energy and telecom cable systems, was awarded a contract worth 17 million euros by the New Brunswick Power Corporation for the development of a new submarine cable link in the Bay of Fundy. Now, the Bay of Fundy is off the east coast of New Brunswick, and it is a bay that has the highest tide swing of any geographic setup in the world. So it's very powerful, very difficult area to service in terms of equipment and cabling systems. The next slide, please. In terms of infrastructure, again, there are construction opportunities for EU companies under CETA. These include services and supplies for construction related to bridges, highways, tunnels, subways, railways, transportation services, and many others. And I wanted to use the Gordie Howe International Bridge being built today to link Windsor, Ontario with Detroit, Michigan. It is a procurement that has significant EU company involvement, both at the construction phase and for the ongoing, I think it's 30-year management phase. The project, for a variety of reasons, including national security concerns, because it has an international bridge, it's being completed with Canadian subsidiaries of EU companies, among others. It's interesting to note that even the non-winning bidders had significant EU country participation. One was a large Spanish construction company, which participated through its recently acquired US construction company and set up a structure in Canada for this project, but would be used to hopefully allow them to do additional procurements in significant infrastructure projects all across Canada. So for national security reasons, but for tax reasons, for the R&D reasons, for the ability to have the clearances that it needed to have because this was an international structure. It was a CETA project, but it was performed and procured by companies that actually established a presence here. In terms of the clean tech procurement, again, a broad range of services, engineering, integrated engineering, technical testing and analysis, quality control and inspection, sewage and refuse disposal, sanitation, and similar services. There was a recently published public letter in May of 2020, which asked the Canadian government to pursue a resilient recovery as a result of COVID-19, and it attached the signatures of companies and industry associations across Canada. The campaign, it had over 2,000 company signatures. The campaign was led by Clean Energy Canada and has asked the federal and provincial governments to commit to a three-pronged post-recovery and resilience plan that would introduce stimulus into Canada's tech sector. So this spells opportunity for companies wishing to expand into Canada, and it's those types of public letters to the government and from the government that are helpful and contain helpful tips for procurement opportunities. The information and communication technology sector is, again, covers a broad range of ICT services, including data processing, software implementation, hardware installation, and others. Canada has a number of technology hubs, including in Toronto, Waterloo, the Toronto Waterloo Tech Corridor, Vancouver, Calgary, Montreal, and Ottawa. One of the positives, if there is a positive coming out of the pandemic for businesses who develop products and services in this area, is that there's an increased reliance on technology by government and governmental institutions that is occurring as a result. Institutions such as the courts are being forced into the modern era with virtual hearings and appeals, all of which require technology procurement. And they are showing that there are opportunities to tailor solutions to these types of institutions to allow them to exist. And what's happening is, and my husband's a judge on the Court of Appeal, is I think the government and the judicial system is seeing that there are benefits in terms of cost savings to doing some of these and providing some of these services remotely, so that there will be opportunities even after we conquer the pandemic for procurement in these areas. Next slide. Canada, the federal government, has created innovation superclusters and has an innovative supercluster initiative, has committed almost $1 billion over 5 years, which I expect will be increased in the not too distant future. It's gone to support a small number of business-led innovation superclusters that have the greatest potential to accelerate economic growth. Investing in these superclusters and the development of platform technologies are intended to boost Canada's competitiveness and increase productivity in some key areas, and also foster greater collaboration between businesses and create new domestic and international business opportunities through integrated supply chains. Next. I want to just say a word to add on to what Eliane said about Quebec, and that is the importance of the French language. Quebec is the only province in which French is the language of business, and the laws are based on the civil code. All other provinces are English speaking and or bilingual, and offer government services in both languages. But those legal systems are based on the common law. So there's a certain familiarity for some European companies in dealing with Quebec, but they'll find the rest of Canada procurement friendly as well. And the second last, I guess, slide. I wanted to use an example of the LRT projects that have been developed municipality across Canada in Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, and Edmonton as examples of procurement projects where there is significant EU country involvement, and also as an example of projects where there is participation at all three government levels. So there will be federal funding, provincial funding, and municipal funding, and all three levels will have a significant say in how those projects proceed. And next. In terms of the government procurement process, as Eliane said, we're not quite there yet with a single access point for certainly for the provinces and municipalities. We do have one mechanism that we can search, but until those are fully implemented and we have a 5-year implementation period, you will need to really have some guidance in terms of understanding the rules and requirements that are currently in place and always administered separately by those three levels of government. So obtaining the right advice from specialists is key for the successful procurement process. And we believe that Miller Thomson, because we routinely advise on these processes from our 11 offices in 5 provinces, are uniquely positioned to help EU companies in successfully contracting at all levels of government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eugene, Eliane, and Barbara, for this very useful presentation. So now we'll get to the second part of the presentation, and I now invite Marie-Lou Denis to present the government procurement opportunities for Canadian companies in the European Union. Marie-Lou Denis has been working as a Canadian Foreign Service Officer in Canada and now abroad since 2009. She is currently in charge of trade policy affairs within the commercial section of the mission of Canada to the EU, with a particular focus on the trade in goods and procurement sectors. So Marie-Lou, it's for you.
Yes, and thank you very much. Thank you, Delphine and Stephen, for inviting me, and I'm glad to be here to talk to you guys today. And I look forward to the quick discussions as well right after. So I will basically, I have to apply the trick that you showed me just here. So how?
And in the meantime, while she's putting the presentation on your screen, again, don't hesitate to ask your question in the Q&A section. We already have some interesting questions. We'll have a slight delay, I guess, of 5 to 10 minutes. So for those who are interested in staying to the end, we'll end around 11:20.
Sorry, it doesn't seem.
Okay, let me then.
Give me 1 second. Just. And then
technical issues.
Yes. Okay. So we're there.
Okay. Great.
Apologies for that. So, so I will present briefly about the opportunities in Europe. So, what the key opportunities are, a bit of an overview of the EU market, and then moving into a bit similar to what our colleagues just did for the Canadian side, procurement regulations, policy and practices here in the EU, and then assessing your access, how to assess your access level as a Canadian company under CETA, and as well as show you a few successes and tips that we had as Canadians on the EU market. So first, why considering the EU? It sometimes can seem obvious, but from experience, we know that there's been a lot of companies are quite experienced on the US market and less so on the EU market, given the recent signature of the CETA. So some of the key advantages, obviously the size. So it's a massive market. So approximately 1.8 trillion if you exclude now the UK, who's in transition mode, which is approximately 13% of the EU GDP. So a similar proportion as in Canada, but for a massive market. We also talk about a single market in the sense that there's more and more common rules and regulations between member states in the EU, and that helps also doing business across the whole Eurozone. And then a relatively open market. So compared to other markets that are as large, I would say it's the most open market that you'll find, with a central contact point, the tenders electronic daily system, TEDS, that's applicable for on which a number of contracts have to be advertised when they're above thresholds under EU law. And that's equivalent to 170,000 contracts per year that are advertised there. So it's quite significant. And along with the transparent procedure that is guaranteed by EU directives. So if we look at the key procurement entities in the EU, so who does procurement? The EU is a bit of a special beast in the sense that it's not a federation, it's an association of countries that is managed by, at the top, the central EU institutions. So the executive power within that is the EU Commission, who works also with the Council, so the member state and the Parliament. So the EU institutions generally have, we found, growing regulatory and convening power and quite significant budgetary leverage in niche areas, like infrastructure, like agriculture, like innovation, for example. That said, the EU budget remains quite small compared to the budget of member states. It's something to really keep in mind. So the EU level budget, as you can see there, it's 1/50th of the combined national budgets of all EU 28 member states. The balance will change probably slightly after the Brexit sort of transition is completed, but still, you can see that there. So essentially, when you talk procurement in the EU, although there are opportunities at the institutions level, it remains so a collection of national markets, which vary in size, in national preferences and policies, and who have their own budget and national procurement system and regulations. And when we talk national, to add to the complexity, so there's also the subnational level in some member states who are also federations like Canada. So you can see, for example, Germany here, who is a federation, so has they have their own regulations at the Bundesland level, and then similarly, Spain will tend to procure quite regionally, as well as Belgium and a few other member states. So something to keep in mind. So if you look at the broader member states' priorities, so where do member states put their money? So that's data from Eurostat. So you can see that in general, public spending is fairly high in the EU. So on average, a total of 46% of GDP. Of course, that's not only procurement, so that includes also other expenses, but that still gives you a sense of the sectors so the priorities in each country. So the blue part here is the EU, so on average, high level of social protection, health, public services, education. And then you have variations also at the member state level. So you see France quite high across the board, but you'll see differences if you're a defense company, for example, like, you tend to go maybe to France where expenses are much higher, and maybe, well, depending, but Ireland has a very small budget in defense. There's differences between the emerging markets as well and the more established markets. If you look at the example of Lithuania, for example, which is the light blue here, so social protection would be a bit lower in terms of priorities. So yeah, so you have differences there that you have to keep in mind. And I would say the key there would be to find the right market in Europe if you're interested in procurement opportunities here. So to give you a sense, and size obviously is not necessarily a problem if it's a smaller market, but to give you a sense of the size of those markets, you have here a range. So again, I included the UK, although it's in transition mode, just to show you a bit, give you a bit of a comparative. So UK is a massive market, but I guess within the EU 27, the largest markets would be quite far France, followed by Italy, Germany, Poland, the Scandinavians, they're quite high as well there, and then Spain, the Netherlands, and then the smaller countries who remain significant, so 5 to 10 billion range. You have the Czech Republic, for example, Ireland, Australia, Austria, Romania, and Finland, and then the smaller ones. So this, it's to show you a little bit when I talked about the decentralized procurement, and I know our colleagues from the Canadian side also talked about it. So you have, that's a graph from the OECD. I apologize, it's in German, but you can see here Canada fares quite high when it comes to, so that's the share of central procurement is quite small compared to the share of provincial procurement. That's up there. And you can see the patterns, and as Canadian companies, you'll be familiar with that. For Belgium, for Spain, Italy, Germany, so quite similar. So the distribution. So when you approach governments there, you should know that. So depending the level, it's something to consider. So maybe you go to the subnational level instead of the federal level in priority. And that compares, you know, for example, it's quite different when you go to Slovakia, somewhere around here, so where it's quite high, so very centralized. And then France, who is not a federation, but remains somewhere in the middle in terms of the distribution. So it's really to give you an idea. When we look at the participation of foreign entities, and that's something, so I think we've established that now. So procurement happens primarily in each member state. And then when I say in each member state, I also mean that it's not so fluid between member states. So there are different patterns as well, depending if the country is an emerging or an established market. Also, if it's a small or a bigger state, then sometimes bigger states will tend to procure more internally, where the smaller states or the less, let's say, the more emerging states, less developed states will need to procure from outside. But basically, if you look at overall, so direct cross-border procurement, which means procurement from a foreign country, it's only 3 to 5% of all contracts awarded. And you'll see some of them are they're quite high, like the smaller one, like Luxembourg, very open economy as well. Ireland, so they will fare high. The blue here is the direct procurement. So you have, it's really the smaller ones who tend to do it more. And then the indirect cross-border procurement, so that part is quite encouraging to see that basically also procurement from a subsidiary, and that would include you know, either a Canadian subsidiary in France or even a German subsidiary in France. So then if you take a look at the indirect part, then you move to 25% of all the procurement. So that means that if you want to procure, like if you want to be chosen as a provider, of course, direct procurement can work, especially for niche products and things like that. But indirect, so if you are established in the country, sometimes it can be easier. Otherwise, partnering is an option. But that data is quite significant in that sense. So if we look at the participation of SMEs, because I know many of you are probably SMEs and exploring the possibility of being more active here. So there are some favorable practices in the EU for SMEs. It's quite a priority these days, and they're trying to improve to make sure that the access is fair and that they don't give all the contracts to the larger players. So one of them that I find interesting is a division of contracts into lots. And that's something that the EU Commission encourages member states and entities to do. So basically, if there's a big works contract that's available, there's a room in the to split it into smaller sort of subcontracts, so that you could apply if you're an SME and you're able to do that part of the work. You could apply on that part of the work separately and have a chance to get it. And that's something that's done more and more. There's a lot of innovative procurement being done as well. So, and I know the Commission tries to encourage the selection based on economically most advantageous proposal instead of just cost benefit. That's applied apparently in 55% of cases, and that's improving. And I think that can probably help innovative like small companies who are nimble get more contracts. Yet, so we have to be, of course, realistic. The success rate for SMEs does not currently match the contribution to GDP. But the good news is that it went up from 58% of the above threshold contracts, and we'll see the thresholds in a minute, but 58% of the above threshold contract in 2011 to 65% in 2017, or 33% in value terms. But you see it improves. And there again, it's important to look at the big picture as well. But if you look at those that fare well on that scale, so you have some of the smaller, some of the emerging countries as well. And in some cases, what we find is that the emerging countries have more robust procurement regulations, because they want to avoid, they want to ensure transparency and ensure that everything is fair. And sometimes the systems are newer, so and sometimes more innovative. So that might be the reason why there's a few of them there. There's Germany that fares quite good as well. So anyways, interesting stats. And overall, I would say the share of successful SMEs is quite high for works and services, so type contracts, as well as manufacturing and construction. But you can see here, so there's a number of sectors in which they're active in the EU. So in terms of the broader trends to watch in EU procurement, so if we go back to the broader sort of EU picture, I would say overall, and I know our colleagues mentioned it for the Canadian side as well, environmentally friendly technologies and products. I think it's something that's quite attractive right now, and even more so like for the next few years, given that the EU Commission, the current EU Commission that just came into power at the end of 2019, they made green tech and the green transition, so the transition to a carbon neutral economy, a huge priority of their mandates, and it's something that they see sort of interacting with all sectors of the economy, and of course including procurement. The EU was quite advanced already on green procurement. They're promoting these practices. They have this green procurement handbook that's quite interesting, and that sets a whole list of criteria and certifications that are good to have, and sometimes that the entities can include in the call for bids to ensure that they could add that as a criteria, for example. But it's quite transparent, and so if you are aware of these trends, you can adapt and you can portray yourself, and you can maybe acquire those certifications or something equivalent. So that's something to stay on top of, I think, for those of you who are interested. There's also the prospect, I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but under the new Green Deal, so this new green policy of the Commission, the idea of making maybe some procurement criteria more mandatory, like now it's more on a voluntary basis. So we'll see how that evolves as well. Well, those are important developments. Then there's a bit of an increase in defense spending and coordination. So this idea to have more innovative defense and invest in innovation programs at the EU level. Try also to encourage more joint procurement between member states in the defense space. So that's a big preoccupation right now here. Significant also some development assistance efforts who are being reinforced. And I should add also, so the second huge priority, so aside from green, is digital. So the Commission also presented a huge strategy for digital, make a digital transition, a successful digital transition, which means establishing more infrastructure, more local infrastructure, more connectivity infrastructure in the region, so that there's a whole set of initiatives I think that should derive from that in the coming years, which are reinforced, of course, by the COVID crisis. Yes, so it's really significant. So the other portion of the new priorities, it's driven also by the COVID crisis. So in response to COVID, so the Commission has vowed to be, and I think the member states are very much buying into this. So it's a very broad trend in the EU. So this idea of reliable sources of products, of also sustainable sources, and this idea also to reduce dependency on single source imports and diversifying sources of raw materials in strategic sectors. And that can be quite interpreted as quite broad. So even in the digital sector, they realized they were very dependent on China, for example, for some pills. And so I think, you know, as Canadians, and I know it's part of our strategy as well, this idea to be more like greener. And so I think we have a very, very good connection right now with Europe, both under CETA and also because our policies are so aligned. So I think, you know, whether in the digital, the green, or even the health sector, I think there's as Canadians, I think you have a good, as Canadian champions, there's a way to portray yourself as, I think we're viewed favorably, and it's important maybe to underscore these things as you bid on contracts. And the last point for this slide I wanted to mention is the idea that the EU sometimes also is, in emergency situations, they have established a joint procurement agreement, so under which they are able, in exceptional circumstances, to do joint procurement with all the member states. So they basically sign the contracts, and then the member states can place the orders. So that's something just I thought to be aware of for you if you're in that space. So for example, for the supply of PPE, and they're also developing stockpiling of PPE. And again, the money is at the member state level in those cases. So they are inviting member states to do stockpiles that would be available for the whole of the EU. So, so the money is being spent at the member state level. So for you, the client is the member state, but definitely the EU is behind, and sometimes funding those projects, you know, as high of to up to 70 to 100%. And the criteria are decided at this level here. So those are situations in which sometimes it's helpful to have intelligence and to know people at both levels, so both the EU, so in Brussels, and the member state level. So something we can sometimes help you with as well. So in terms of trends, just quickly, because I don't want to spend too much time on this, but on the next EU budget, so it's just to illustrate what I was saying. So, so there's big pockets of money coming up. There's the EU 7-year budget that is currently being negotiated, and there's a hope that it could be decided by the end of the year. So that's a pocket of, if it's agreed, it would be a pocket of 1 trillion. And it would be accompanied by Next Generation EU, which is a temporary reinforcement measure because of COVID, so additional money of 750 billion, and then a few additional pockets as well. So you can see there's a lot of money coming, there's a lot of spending. So the pandemic does not stop government from spending, to the contrary. So something for you to continue to watch carefully. And that's it. So in terms of the key timelines, that budget should be decided hopefully by the end of the year. And then from there, the procurement processes would start early next year in 2021. And the reason I mentioned that is that we have a lot of clients, of Canadian companies we work with, who are waiting for this budget to be decided. not because their direct client is the EU. Sometimes yes, sometimes it's the EU institutions, but most of the times their client is the member state. But the member states are waiting for to know if those budgets will come and in what amount before making the final decision. So again, a space to watch. So if all goes well, early next year, we'll see a lot of new spending and new decisions taken. And obviously the procurement process cannot start until the money is decided. So that's the key aspect there. In terms of new money, so right now, in the meantime, so there's a temporary state aid framework that's being put in place, that has been put in place by the Commission right after COVID-19. And it's this idea that basically normally the member states are not allowed to help their companies too much for competition reasons, because they have to, they should not, safeguard companies who are not sustainable. But in these circumstances, they have been allowed to do so. So they ask normally the permission to the Commission, they submit their plans, and then they put them in place. So again, well, not directly procurement, but huge spending that will still translate, and that means that the EU economy will continue to grow in the next little while. So that's positive. So in terms of the EU regulatory environment per se, so as I said, very different regulations because every member state decides their own legislation in the field. But to strengthen the single market and make processes easier and more transparent across Europe, and make sure that everybody has a chance to bid, like in everybody's market, because I think it's also part of their nation sort of building efforts. So the EU has adopted a series of directives who cover supply, services, works in all sectors. So the main one is the Procurement Directive that's here. But also there's a utilities, so specific to those sectors, concession contracts, defense procurement, which is also quite specific. And that really guarantees, that really requires member states basically to adopt legislation that are coherent with those directives. So all of the member states have the same, for example, thresholds, which determine the advertisement of contracts on TED. So essentially, all legislations will be relatively similar. They have to comply with that. So basically, for you, what's important is that above below threshold, so the directives guarantee that the contracts will be advertised on TED, public, and the whole procedure as well is standardized. So there's a standard form which is disclosed whenever the call for bids is published. And that facilitates a lot because the procedures are the same across the EU, whether in France or in Bulgaria. So yeah, huge advantages from that perspective. And if you look at the thresholds, they're not overly high as well. So if for central government entities, so it would be 140,000 euros approximately. For regional entities, it's a little bit higher, but it's like 200,000. And then public supply service contract for utilities a bit higher. So sometimes they're strategic sectors, but essentially it's relatively low. So anything else has to be published, even if it's a small city, whatever it is. And of course, if it's so member states are responsible to apply those legislations to make sure it's well enforced. And if they don't, and there's a whole jurisprudence here at the EU level, and so the EU can sort of sue them and try to change their course of action. So there's a few cases, of course, and so the companies are protected. It's predictable, it's transparent, and it's positive for companies, and it protects companies, Canadian companies, obviously, that are based here in Europe as subsidiaries. So under so there are basically 5 standard procedures that that this establishes. So the most frequent ones, I would say, is the open procedure. So it's a one-stage procedure. All potential suppliers can apply, so it's open. And you have a number of days to submit your tender, so it's quite simple. You have the restricted procedure, then you have to sort of express an interest to participate, and then they'll invite you. They'll select 5 at least, and then they'll move forward. So it's a 2-stage approach. And then the other ones are relatively similar, but there's a bit more discussion. So the other one, competitive procedure, so there's a bit more discussions involved. It's more complex projects. So I won't go too much into details, but we can discuss it further if you're interested. Criteria must be specific and objective. So that's also what the directives guarantee. So there's so there's a list of the space in the form for the selection criteria and all of that. So it's very good. And I can show you an example in a quick minute. So under CETA, your access, so it's very similar to what our colleagues on the Canadian side told you. So if you're a subsidiary, obviously you're covered by the directives, it's good. If you're based in Canada, then CETA determines your level of access. What's good is that and I guess it was made for that, so the thresholds in CETA are quite similar to the TED thresholds. The reason being that the EU could, well, it's easier, I guess, when they align them. So not all similar, but in most cases, they are at the same level. If you look at the goods and services for central government entities, for example, so this means that most contracts that are advertised on TED, you'll have access, and that's quite significant. If you compare to other EU partners, I mean, we have one of the highest accesses. The only other members who would have the same access as us are the ones members of the global procurement agreement, to which we are party of as well, but we had a few reservations before CETA that we basically removed. But those who don't have reservations would have a comparable access. So in terms of the key CETA exceptions, so again, similar to what our colleagues talked about earlier, so, but not exactly. So the general exceptions, international assistance, defense and security, measures for persons with disabilities. So these things would of course be accessible to you if you're a subsidiary, and notably in the assistance field, there's a lot of expertise in Canada. So we see a lot of companies who now are trying to establish here in Brussels and in the EU in general. In terms of the specific EU exceptions, you have shipbuilding, postal services, ports and airports, as well as broadcasting. So basically, if you exclude those aspects, then you are covered for most contracts that are in TED. And what I want to say is, if you're not sure about the applicability of the exception, it's good to ask. So contact either the contracting authority or even us, the Trade Commissioner Service, either in the member states or here in Brussels. We would be pleased to check further. And sometimes there are gray zones. It's completely normal. So it's worth checking instead of not applying, I would say. So knowing all this, when you next visit TED, so the central the central point of contact for contracts, you can find so approximately 1,700 contract notices a day from all over the economic area and from all levels above thresholds. You can find the archive files as well, so who won previous bids, and that's something that's super useful. I think you can know your competitors better. So that's very, very transparent, and something obviously that we're looking at having in Canada as well once we finalize the system. So you can make a search easily, in TED using CPV codes. So it's similar to NACS codes, and you're probably more familiar with those. It's very easy to search once you're in the system. And you can have a good sense of your eligibility under CETA because there's a little bit in the standard form on the website. When you sort of find a contract offer, there's a tick box at the bottom for GPA. So are GPA members eligible? And Canada, well, as I said, CETA and GPA access levels are very similar. So if that box is clicked, then you have a good idea that probably you're eligible under CETA. So very quickly, in terms of so that's an example of contract. I know it's very small, but basically for each contract notice, so that's the standard form. It's summarized, but so every form will tell you the applicable directive, the type of contract. So here's the services contract. It's the directive, so the 2014-24. So you can refer to it if you need. You have the standard CTV codes nomenclature that's there, that's always there. So you can search using that, and it's really detailed, so you can use that. You have the estimated contract value. You have here it says if it's divided into lots or not. So the what I told you for SMEs, if you're interested in by the bidding on smaller portions. You have the conditions for participation that are very detailed, normally quite transparent, sometimes in different languages, so be prepared as well if you don't speak. This is in Italy, so if you don't speak Italian, maybe you need help. It depends. And then the procedure type. So I talked to you about the types of procedure, the 5 types. So here it says type of procedure open. So you know a bit the steps that are coming. So you know that you can apply directly on this one, that they don't need to select the, so you have all the features there. And then it tells you also information about the government procurement agreement. The procurement is covered by the GPA. So that means probably yes under CETA. That's already a good indication if you're interested. So very quickly on successes. So in terms of what we did so far, we are very happy with our success rate at this point. And what's useful is that we can see also which companies are successful when we search on TED. So it's quite transparent as well. Here I didn't list their names because I didn't want to use necessarily their names, but just to give you a sense of some contracts that we've won in the last couple of years. So it's super diverse, and there's people successful in many sectors. The services sector, as mentioned, is quite. They say SMEs are successful in that sector, and it's quite true. I think it reflects professional services, things like that. It's quite active. Here you have an example. So Belgium, life science sector, but it services again, so hospital certification services, for example. Professional services for market and economic research. So those are smaller contracts, but for SMEs, quite attractive. Life sciences, so delivery of salivary kits, so more on the good side. Procurement of cables, coaching of startups, procurement of advanced equipment. Obviously, if it's a procurement from Canada, so those are really successes from Canadian companies who are established in Canada. Those are things that are, I guess, if the EU goes to Canada for procurement, it will probably be because your equipment is quite special or quite niche. So you'll see a lot of those niche products there. An interesting one was the setting up of a city bike service, both in France and in Spain. And that's quite the Spanish one is quite significant. So 163 million euros. But that one was in partnership with a local services provider who could be there and sort of make sure that he can provide the service regularly and probably have the reputation and the contacts as well in the country. So those, I want to reinforce that message, and I know our colleagues have mentioned it earlier as well. I think partnerships are important, and for bigger contracts like this, if you want to sort of be known, use people who have the reputation. That's really a key advice. In terms of successes for EU-based Canadian subsidiaries, I think we've been successful for a long time, even before CETA. But just a few examples for the last couple of years. So in the transport sector, I'm sure you can probably guess who that is. Tramway parts in Belgium, sale of locomotives in Czech Republic, and then professional services for EU institutions. So something that we don't think always. So it's the other parts, so not the member states, but really the core institutions. So classified doc management system. So that's something that people need, especially administrations that usually need. And then professional services in Belgium, so consulting services again. So you see there's a bit of a trend there, although it's quite diverse. And I could give you many more. So in retrospective, I guess some tips for me, if you're interested in the EU market and you're serious about it, it's really that question to ask. So in which region can you make a difference? Which member states would be the easiest target market? And sometimes, as I mentioned, language can be an issue. So think of that as well. Having the right people to provide the right services in the right language sometimes can be key. Am I able to deliver service from distance, or do I need a partner? So again, as mentioned, can my services contribute to delivery of key EU policies? As discussed, the Green Deal, things like that. So make sure that you portray yourself as being in line with these things. And do I have the relevant certifications? So that's also quite key. And there's a good website. We could share it afterwards, but on eCertis, where you have a listing of all the certifications that exist in each of the member states, and you can look at the equivalencies and all of that. So that can be useful. So once again, I think as a new entrant on the market, whether you're established or whether you're thinking of establishing yourself or whether you're even from, so building, if you want to build credentials and experience, it's good to work with partners. So what I wanted to say is the Trade Commissioner Service in closing is ready to assist you with that. We can assist you building partnerships. We have people all over Europe, so in all the member states, as well as here in Brussels. We work together. We can sometimes make approaches on your behalf or provide you with intelligence on opportunities or the policy sort of environments around that. And these days, especially on bigger projects, I think having that team approach can be very, very helpful. So that's it. So thank you very much, and I hope we still have time for the discussion. But look forward to the questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Marie-Lou. Maybe I invite the panelists to come back on video, and so we can all be here. We'll just do the technical side. So just before, I know we are a little bit over time right now, so I'm sorry for this. So before we jump into the Q&A session, sorry, I would like to just make an announcement. The EU delegation to Canada will conduct a series of 3 webinars on government procurement in the fall. And so after today's webinar, you will receive an email with some information about it and some information also on UCAN and how to view again this webinar. Let me just also launch a quick poll so we can actually have your some information for our next activities. So during the presentation, we actually replied some question already in the Q&A section. So I think for the question that were here, we have most of the answers. Again, if you have other questions, don't hesitate also to contact us as UCAN or Mueller-Thomson team or Marie-Lou. All their contacts were in the presentation. So now, if I go back to the Q&A, let me just, we had some few questions on the internet. What should industry do if a government procurement invokes an R&D or national security exemption? So I think this was more a question for Mueller-Thomson team. So if you can give us some insight on that. I don't know who wants to go ahead. Barbara, let me unmute you. No, wait. You're muted. Can you unmute? Yeah, yes. Great.
Yeah. Okay, so national security and R&D, each of the member states has certain exceptions from the CETA availability. And, I think Eugene had a list and we had a list from the other side in terms of what is accepted out and available only to domestic companies. So if that is the case, then your path to access those opportunities is very clear. You must have a Canadian, and it doesn't have to be Canadian, but any province incorporation to access those opportunities. So you can get around the limitations and exceptions that are available under or required under CETA, and the protection that's available to CETA through CETA to domestic companies by becoming a domestic company. And it's really that simple.
Thank you, Barbara. There was also quite a lot of question on security screening for the EU-based company, but I think we answered most of them in the Q&A section. But maybe Eliane, if you just, or Barbara, I don't know if you just want to say just some quick words, because it was several questions on that topic.
Yeah, I can, Eliane.
Yeah.
You know, there is a sort of a security response checklist that the government provides. So in terms of security, there's certain levels of security that are required for various projects if there is a security clearance required. So it may be at the corporate level, it may be at the individual level, and it's usually applied where there are you know, secret information that is important to national or provincial security. So we can make that checklist available, and we can see the types of inquiries and where those apply. But any CETA project that has a security requirement will say so in the procurement. We've been involved in some circumstances where, because there was a short time frame, the security clearance, you know, takes a fair amount of time. We had to hire someone who had the clearance. So we didn't, you know, we got the corporate clearance, but we couldn't put the individuals that we had on staff through the clearance process. So we hired people. There are people who have that clearance, and if they're available in your industry, you can hire them for that purpose.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. There was also a question, I think, I guess it can be useful for many of you. It was on how does a EU-based business obtain a CRA number? So it's possible that you get it online, if I actually take Eliane's answer on the Q&A section. Again, I've sent in the chat box the links to all the guides, so you have all the detailed information of what we have said today. And I think we will just go to the last question. I think this one is more for Marie-Lou. Apparently, we Canadian companies have good access compared to EU member states. Why have our exports significantly declined in many tangible goods industries such as dairy, beef since signing the CETA? What are the main or biggest bottlenecks, and how can the SMEs overcome the standard requirements?
Yes, I think at the beginning, I think what we saw, and it's true in the media, we saw a lot of the big contracts in Canada that were seized more immediately by EU companies. I think it's a bit of a natural movement in the sense that a lot of those companies were already established in Canada long ago, or were bigger and more easily could more easily establish in Canada and then build those networks. Now it's true that for us, we have lots of SMEs who are interested, but who are starting. And so for us, we still see an increase in trend. We haven't done a detailed survey, I guess, recently, but when we look into TED, the numbers are still encouraging. I think it's picking up. So I think in many respects, it's a question of time. We are working very hard with the EU under CETA as part of our annual committees as well. So we have lots of conversations on trying to build that support within the EU, and also improve the knowledge of our own companies about CETA, about what it offers, and about the EU market. So the guides that we've just published is part of these efforts, and I know the EU side is doing the same thing. We're doing a lot of collaborative efforts, trying to share success stories and things like that. But I would say the message I want to give today as well is that we have this great collaboration under CETA and these regular discussions. And so if you have questions, or you feel like some standards are difficult to understand, or you're overwhelmed by that, please let us know, because we can either help you try to overcome them with partnerships and stuff, or we can also discuss it with the EU officials as part of the discussions that we have, and I think it's very constructive.
Thank you very much, Marilou. I think it's time to end this webinar. I just wanted to first say on what even Marilou just said. If you have any question within the CETA framework, whether you are a Canadian company or a European company, don't hesitate to also send us your questions. We can also try to see if you have any issues or whatever. We can try to answer your question and make your way around CETA easier. And yes, I wanted to really thank our panelists from Global Affairs and Miller Thomson team for this great webinar. I think it was very useful because it's true that when we think of CETA, it's not always obvious that public procurement is part of it. So again, thank you very much to all of you. And I don't know if Stephen, you want to share the last word of this webinar. I invite you to just maybe unmute and say some few words.
Well, I'd just like to say, again, a great many thanks to all of our panelists today. I know it was a lot of information to absorb, but most of it is very, very pertinent, very encouraging for the opportunities that may or may not have been, you know, let's say easy to maneuver maybe prior to some of the information we got today. I hope that we can continue in the near future with some more enlightenment, that we can shine on the opportunities with the CETA agreement between Canada and Europe, and absolutely look forward to seeing all of you again in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening or a great day, depending on where you are calling from. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.